Hello and welcome to the second episode of the SDI podcast. I'm your host, Scarlett Bayes, Industry Analyst at SDI. My guests on this podcast are Jayne Groll and Eveline Oehrlich from the DevOps Institute. We recorded this at the annual DevOps Enterprise Summit in London, which is a really cool event. If you're interested in DevOps, then it's definitely something you should try and get out and go to. We discussed some really interesting things, such as stuff around skills and how we address the digital skills gap, which is such a prevalent issue in the industry. And we also talked a bit about the perception of the service desk and how certain elements of DevOps can help to improve, particularly the business's perception of the service desk. And finally, we also talked about DevOps ways of working and how that can impact the way the service desk works, and how certain aspects of the DevOps philosophy can actually help to improve the communication and collaboration between not only service desk staff, but wider IT departments and other departments within the business. So I hope you enjoy the podcast, so please stay tuned. Hello and thank you for tuning into today's podcast. We are here at the DevOps Enterprise Summit in London. I'm joined today by Jayne Groll and Eveline Oehrlich from the DevOps Institute. Hello ladies.
Hello. Thank you for having us, Scarlett.
Thank you for joining me. Can we start by telling me a bit about yourselves, your history, your company, just any of that?
Sure. So I'm Jayne Groll. I'm CEO of the DevOps Institute and one of its co-founders. We founded about 4 years ago. We're an open member community, so membership is at no cost, with the intent of really connecting the very global DevOps community from a people, process, and technology perspective. So we have partners all around the world that deliver training. We don't do any direct training, but we accredit 7 certifications around DevOps. And we've just introduced something called the Skill Framework, SKIL, skills for your career, knowledge for your insight, I for ideas, the opportunity to share ideas, and L for continuous learning. So very excited. As I mentioned to you, Scarlett, before we started recording, I come from the service desk industry, so it's very interesting to have this conversation.
Okay, thank you.
Great, yeah, nice to meet you. Thank you. Eveline Oehrlich, I'm Chief Research Analyst at DevOps Institute, helping the team to stand up some syndicated research. Just recently, actually, about a year now, Jayne and I actually are celebrating our 1-year anniversary.
Absolutely.
We met last year here in London and known each other before. Before that, I was Research Director and Vice President at Forrester Research for 13 years, doing a variety of research around a variety of topics. DevOps, of course, was one area I focused on, do advisory with vendors and enterprise client, end user clients. I also have a service desk history because when I started at Forrester in October 16, 2006, I know that day very well. I actually was hired into being the first service desk analyst, doing a lot of work in service desk with the vendors in the space and enterprises, helping them to mature whatever they're doing into where they are, hopefully today already or still.
Okay, fantastic. So obviously we're here to talk about DevOps, and for me it's from a service desk perspective. So for me, DevOps and service desk is really about the communication, the collaboration, more than the technology side of things, but of course automation plays a role. What marries DevOps and service desks for you too?
So that's really interesting. I think in some ways there's a gap there. So there's a lot of conversation about incident management in DevOps, particularly recently with the rise of site reliability engineering as a practice and a job. And so how do we manage incidents in a very fast-paced, very fast release cycle type of environment? And so I think there's a lot of emphasis on incident management. I don't know, very frankly, whether there's a lot of emphasis yet on the relationship between the service desk, right? And you know, of course, we all know that, but I think for the benefit of the podcast, you know, the service desk faces the consumer of services, right? So we call them a user, call them a customer, however you want to do that. But we talk a lot about value creation. We talk a lot about value streams. But the actual integration of those that actually face the customer, I think there's a little bit of a gap there, truthfully. Site reliability engineering certainly looks at overcoming some of the challenges, again, with an outage or an incident, service levels, really looking at managing service levels. But again, that frontline support in many ways hasn't been addressed, but it obviously is very, very critical, because if you're going to release fast, you also have to service desk fast, right? And I think that's something that is an open opportunity, frankly, even from our perspective.
I would absolutely agree. I think I would add there's a bit of a left shifting happening. So what that means is that those who are just not the telephone support anymore, because we have a lot of automated capabilities. We have AI ops or AI in the service desk where things are being already automated, where a service desk individual doesn't have to do certain things. And maybe some of the ops work, which traditionally was done by IT operations, which now are part of the DevOps journey, is being shifted into more of the service desk, which in turn makes those people much more valuable and their skill set needs to change also. So they're no longer just those who write knowledge articles, but those are actually people who potentially feed something back into the DevOps team for continuous improvement on what they have seen and what they have done, which I think is different than what it used to be, even 2 years ago, where organizations said, well, service desk, incident management, that's what they're responsible. I think now it's more they're actually part of the operations team and should be an integral part of the DevOps, because whatever, as you said, Jane, whatever they see relative to incidents is fed back into the loop for continuous improvement around things which need to be done, because employees and customers are still calling the 1-800 number, or in this case, are complaining about sediment in an organization about a problem is being solved and should be solved by the service desk. But for continuous improvement, it can be done by those who are in the DevOps area.
But if you don't mind my kind of feeding in on what Eveline just said, because I think it's really significant. In many ways, DevOps amplifies or elevates not only the responsibility of the service desk, but coming from the service desk, you always were kind of the bottom of the totem pole, right? So you were the entry point for the consumer of the services, and in many cases there was a belief, whether true or not, and more likely less true, that service desk people weren't quite as technical. Right. And service desk people were the original T-shaped people. We talk a lot about T-shape, right? So the stem is your core competency and the top is your general broad knowledge. At the end of the day, service desk folks were really the original T's, because you had to know a lot about a lot of things in order to be able to triage and service and provide service to the consumers that either had a problem or a question. So in some ways, I think DevOps actually elevates that role into with self-help, automated self-help. First layer may not necessarily be something that in the long term, right, our interaction at the first level may change, but that'll push those people up to the second level because they have the competencies and the capabilities. And really, I hadn't really thought about it till you said it, Eveline, but it's absolutely true. They are the original T-shaped people.
Yeah.
Right? And so if we're looking at T-shaping as a model, it is really the service desk folks who now have an incredible opportunity to demonstrate that general knowledge is as important, if not more important, than single ingredient specialist knowledge.
And then just think of the soft skills. One more thing. She got me going. She got us going. Think of the soft skills. Think of the soft skills we learned from our research, that empathy is a very important soft skill to have. Now, when you call or connect with somebody who is supposed to help you, but you're upset, who is the best person in that who has that skill of empathy? Because I need to calm you down, I need to understand, I need to problem solve, I need to collaborate, I now need to go and reach out to 5 others who are there. I need to knowledge gather. I mean, all these soft skills are just a service desk people. Absolutely. So I think it should be a love relationship going forward between those two. I think there is a great complement to the two.
Just picking back up on what Jane said about the service desks not being seen as very technical. If you link that to what Eveline said about the shift left movement, where you've got self-service and automation taking the more repetitive tasks of first line staff, they then have the time to be able to develop their skills and then move into second line.
Absolutely.
But then you hear a lot of people saying that there's a proportion of people that don't want to use self-service, don't want the automation, they want a human point of contact. So what do you think around that?
I think it's my first response is, to some extent, it's a demographic response. I remember doing research on why is it they don't want to use service catalogs, right? Why is there no self-help? If I look at my mother, she does not know how to interact with my iPhone because it's just the way she is, and she's 83. I'm 56. I am afraid of certain things also, and I'm in technology. But if I look at my daughter, who is 24, she has no fear on anything, and she doesn't actually like that human interaction. So at first, I think it's a demographic situation or a demographic thing which causes that type of thing. I mean, that's the top of my head.
I think it's a little bit of all of the above. I think there are demographics that are built into it. It's a very self-serve society where you can get your groceries, your food delivered to you, your interactions are very much online. So your relationship with the technology is very strong, particularly if you grew up with it like your daughter or my children. But I do think that if we start to look at machines, and even machine learning and even AI, to replace that human touch, right? There is a point where you want to talk to a person, right? There is a point, whether it's the entry point and not even second level, there is a point where you can, click and speak to a human. Maybe it's because you need their empathy. Maybe it's because you need to explain what's going on, and the machine will only tolerate so much explanation, right? And sometimes explanations have context around it that the machine can't actually, or the automation can't necessarily synthesize. So there is a point where you need that human being, right? Now, so is there a need for level 1 human touch? Yes. In every single contact? No. Right? So there are those that will absolutely kind of grow into, and I think it's an amazing opportunity. Not that everybody has to become a developer or they have to become, an infrastructure person. The one thing about the service desk was always frustrating for me, which is why organizations like yours are so important. It felt like a tunnel. So I ran a service desk for a long time, so it was always like you had to do your time on the service desk so that you could be elevated to something else,
Yes.
right? It was like jail, right? So, or boot camp, like you
Yeah.
had to come in, go to the service desk, and if you were really good, somebody would recognize you and promote you into something else. And organizations like SDI help make service desk a profession, right? I spent a large part of my career in that profession. So the human element of the service desk, and you have to remember what a service desk does, it provides service. I think a combination or hybrid approach will make sense, but hopefully if there's any message that DevOps brings to the service desk is that you, along with everybody else in IT, are encouraged to grow, right? You're encouraged to learn, you're encouraged to grow your skills, not to get a new job or to get out of jail on the service desk, but to really provide a service back to the consumers of your service. So it is an interesting time. I still do think there's a gap in the sense of there's not a lot of guidance, right? And maybe that's something you and I, talk about figuring out how to do a little research around that. But I don't think there's a disrespect. I think there is an understanding that life after production does require interaction.
Yes. Something I talk a lot about with some of my colleagues is with the digital skills gap, it's getting to a point where it's getting so large, but how do you start to chip away at that? A lot of organisations don't know what skills you're going to need in 3 or 5 years' time. So how do you sort of understand where you're going to be and then figure out what skills IT are going to need and then hire for those skills?
Or develop for those skills.
Or develop.
On an ongoing space. I mean, we know that I just spoke to this young gentleman here, quite interesting. He is doing some survey and found out that individuals like to get their learning portions on a 9 months interval, right? And so if you
Like
think
having a baby.
Yeah, I know. I didn't tell him that because he was probably going, hello. But 9 months, so every 40 weeks, right? Every 40 weeks, people are hungry for some kind of learning. Now, if you're in a service desk environment, you actually have continuous learning because there are scripts and there's over and over the same kinds of things happening. Hopefully those things will be repaired as there are incidents are happening further and further. Those things are being improved by some other team or by that team. But that continuous learning, I think, is a classic part of the front end. And at the same time, through that continuous learning, the customer experience goes up. So as these individuals learn, as they grow their knowledge, and as they start developing their skills, be it in a particular technology because something else is released, some new version is coming out, some new experience, some new process, whatever it is, they learn. And then the customer, the consumers, those who are either being served in the business or external to the business are learning as well. So it's a continuous, always up on the curve of hype continuously, and then we go on and on and on.
But the question that you asked, Scarlett, I think is very relevant, and also is the genesis of how we're working together on this research. So a year ago, Eveline and I met at this conference again, and we had a conversation about, you're right, there's this huge skills gap, and we talk a lot about upskilling and skills transformation, and the range of skills is so broad that as an individual, regardless of what role you play today, you're being told to either become T-shaped or upskill, and then you go, what skills, right? Which one should I focus on, and which are going to be important, which are nice to have, which are not important, and how do you know? And so that's where we collaborated and said, let's launch this global research project and ask the community, right? Let's ask the community, what skills do you think are must have, nice to have, not so important? And it was really fascinating journey because the survey that Eveline crafted was very deep. It was 30 minutes. That's, in the millennial clock, that's like 30 days, right? It was very, very deep. We had about 1,600 people globally complete the survey. And the data was really interesting because it broke down the skills into automation skills, no surprise, process skills, not a great surprise, functional skills, a little bit of a surprise, soft skills, which we now call human skills because soft skills are hard, right? So that human to human skills, and the results were really fascinating even to us. And we thought we would kind of know what some of the results would be, and we kind of understood what we thought the demographics would be, at least regionally. We didn't really do more demographics than that, but yeah, the result has been just fantastic, and now we're getting ready to do it again. So it'll be very, very interesting to kind of see how this evolves year over year. I mean, what about the data?
In terms of, we broke it down further, right? We defined categories first. We had to make sure that we have a framework in terms of categories, and we went further down into all the different types of things. So for example, we found executives valued certain soft skills, actually all soft skills, much higher as must-have than individual contributors. So there's this great guidance for if you are a DevOps human and you are applying for a job, evaluate yourself. Think about what soft skills do you have? What evidence can I show that I have been empathetic, that I have been collaborative, that I have been, et cetera, et cetera. It's not just about showing the certifications you had on AWS and whatever else you were certified, which is also very important, but the value is really what was much more around it. So that was important for, orchestrating those types of knowledge and the capabilities so these people would know. And then if I'm human resources or strategic growth or whatever individuals are part of the decision making, for them it was important also to see what kind of folks are we actually honing into, right? Where are we advertising? Where are we going out into job fairs? What kind of people are we looking for? Could be potentially, if you are looking for in a particular area, you needed people who have very high empathy, for example, in healthcare, right? In healthcare, there's a lot of work being done around new applications, new services, AI, AI stuff, et cetera, et cetera. You might need a lot more empathetic people. And then we found things, for example, that the majority of people said that vertical skills weren't important. So on the one end, they were saying that you needed empathy, but on the other end, the vertical skills, meaning in retail or in healthcare or in manufacturing, were not important, which might this time around change because we have moved in our maturity of DevOps further on into maybe broader in the enterprise versus just in projects. So a lot of those things, the year over year, I think will be even more interesting than the first benchmark we've set for the skills.
Yeah.
Let me ask you a question if you don't mind.
Go ahead.
So what is your community? What's their perspective of DevOps? What do they want to know about how they interact and how the service desk plays a role in this very digital transformation, DevOps-y kind of environment?
Mm-hmm.
Because I think that's really interesting to be able to look at and say, okay, so here's a community that also wants to understand how do we support, right, faster, more frequent changes. So if you don't mind, let me ask you that question.
So something that we see, not just with DevOps, but with a lot of trends, is that you have people that go out and speak about it who are experts in the field, like yourselves, for example, and it seems like it picks up traction really quickly. But then when we as SDI do surveys and try and find out what proportion of the industry are implementing certain things, the proportions are actually really, really small. With DevOps, we did some research a few years ago, and I think it was something like less than 30% even knew what DevOps was. And obviously that's developed a lot as DevOps has grown and the knowledge about what DevOps is has grown. And our most recent research around DevOps showed that 38% of service desk professionals said that their organisation is following a DevOps way of working. And the reason I word it way of working rather than DevOps framework or approach or philosophy is because the communication and collaborative aspect is a lot more important for service desks than the technology side of it. And actually the people side of things was the most important aspect of DevOps for the majority of respondents. So in answer to your question, I'd say that for service desks, it's the breaking down of the silos and understanding what the other parts of the business are doing and understanding how they can support that. But it's definitely a two-way street because the business perspective or perception of the service desk can often not be too great, unfortunately, which is something we want to change, and we're seeing change in quite a few organisations, and hopefully that will start to gain traction and change a lot more. But I think definitely it's more of the people side and the communication aspect of things.
You know, one interesting thing about what you just said, I mean, a lot of interesting things you said, sorry, but one thing which really gives me a little burp, and it's a word I use intentionally, is when you said that the perspective of the service desk is not so good. Let me say something on top of that. The service desk is part of a technology organization. Now, it doesn't matter how hard the DevOps team works. It doesn't matter how many times they're doing releases. Frequency releases is going up, the quality of the software is going up potentially. But if the service desk, so the DevOps team can work as hard as possible, but if the service desk is not in tune, in the boat of what is happening, and they're not marching to the drums, let's put it this way, to what is happening in the rest of the IT team, then it doesn't matter how hard the back team is working. So if the front end is doing great work, the back end is okay too. That's the perception, because the front end shapes the perception. So if the front end is in tune with the DevOps team in the back, and they're not seeing themselves as a separate, but rather than the tip of the spear, the value of the entire IT organization goes up. That's in organizations I've worked with where I've done advisory for the service desk. It's always like if you shape your perception at the front with those who you interact, the rest can screw up multiple times, and it's okay to screw up in the back. So it almost is like the service desk team can actually help that perspective of the value much more than they see themselves as.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think that's why this sort of DevOps mentality around breaking down silos and communication and understanding different parts of the business is so important, because our research shows that about 60% of service desks feel that the business take the good work that they do for granted. So
the fact that with a lot of organizations that are doing DevOps or they're doing Agile or Lean or some facet of that, it's that perception shifts, and understanding what the service desk is actually good for and how integral it is to the business is something that's really important.
Yeah, and I can see, and it's very interesting because with the rise of site reliability engineering, and I don't know if you're at all familiar with SRE, but SRE kind of as a service management approach is doing something that we've wanted in the help desk industry for a very, very long time, which is mentoring and shadowing, right? So if you want a really powerful customer experience, then you also have to equip those that are delivering that experience with knowledge. And it's always been very frustrating that knowledge bases, knowledge articles, mentoring, shadowing has always been something that was always a little shirt tail, right? Yeah, exactly. It's like kind of it's something throws over the fence, and communication between development teams and release teams and the service desk. Find out on Monday morning they released a whole bunch of stuff you weren't expecting, and now you're suddenly, challenged to support it. And yet with SRE, it becomes part of the fabric of SRE, where SREs are shadowing developers and they're spending time in a lot of different disciplines, and so now suddenly it's cool, right? It's cool to be mentored, and it's cool to self-learn, it's cool to grow your skills, and it's cool to be curious and innovative and all of that. Whereas with the service desk, it was a little hands-off, and that's probably why the feeling of not that the business doesn't understand, doesn't necessarily in some ways respect what's happening at that level, because it's seen, as a conduit. So it would be fascinating for me to see if desks kind of transform themselves, right? Where there's a gentleman here who said the first thing he did when he started a DevOps transformation is change the name of his team to systems engineering, right? Because we engineer systems, right? So the service desk may have to go through some time, and they didn't do anything different. They didn't change their roles, they didn't change their salaries, they didn't change their organization, they just changed their name. You mentioned about help desk and service desk. That was an evolution as well, right? So who knows what the next evolution will be, and maybe it's a reliability desk, I don't know, but somewhere along the way, there is now a legitimacy to spend time mentoring, right? Take that time, really kind of take that time to do that, because it's now considered cool and okay. So I don't know, maybe there's something in there. Yeah, it's interesting.
It's considered value add rather than it's value add rather than a cost center, right?
Yeah, this knowledge sharing is now, and that is one thing I will give credibility to DevOps about. Knowledge sharing is a core value. And in the past, it was kind of tribal knowledge, right? Or keep my knowledge to myself, because if I teach you, then I'm no longer important.
Right. Yeah.
And now knowledge sharing is actually a core value. And so maybe that helps the service desk, right? To be able to optimize that.
Knowledge is certainly something that service desks struggle with, because the vast amount of knowledge that there is within an organisation has to be put into this one place. And you're right, you have people that have that knowledge that don't want to share it because then they're not important anymore. So for you two, what do you think is next for service desks, whether it's to do with DevOps or anything else?
So for me, I think part of it is organizational and part of it's individual. Everything we talked about here today about the service desk needs to herald the fact that they are the original T-shaped people. Now, it's not just by name, right? And again, it is kind of adapting to some of the modern approaches, right? So if we think of service desk people, and they should promote themselves as, by the way, did you know how T-shaped we are? Because, the concept of T-shaping is so popular. First of all, I think they need to herald that as something that is valued to the organization, and they should openly share and celebrate that. I think help desk managers, service desk managers, I am old, service desk managers also need to groom that, right? Regardless of what the entry is into the service desk, that you are a T-shaped professional as opposed to you're a generalist or you're not technical enough or whatever. And they need to encourage those that want to learn more technology and or want to learn something new or want to shadow or be mentored or whatever to be able to do that. And then I also think the service desk needs to also self-define the value that they play in DevOps, right? Because remember, DevOps is end-to-end IT, but also if DevOps is talking about value creation, then value is only created when a service is consumed. So they're a very important part of the value stream, and I think that the service desk and the DevOps teams in particular need to build that bridge, right? Because value doesn't occur at deployment, right? And that's, I think, a misbelief that value doesn't. So I do think there has to be a coming together, and some of it's not going to happen passively, right? So I think the service desk needs to very boldly really promote we're T-shaped, we're willing, we're ready, we're able, and here's where value's really created, right? And I think if they take that message forward, it'll be very, very powerful.
I can only say ditto. Change the name, be part of it, and be part of their value chain. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Be your own promoters.
Yeah.
Yeah. Be self-promoters, but not in a victim sense. You know, sometimes at the service desk we were victims. Don't be a victim, right? Don't be a victim. There's a woman from, and I'll end with this because it's kind of interesting. There was a woman named Scarlett Bounty. Did you know Scarlett Bounty? She was in the help desk. She was one of the really early advocates. I think she retired many, many years ago. But she wrote a book for the service desk industry that said, "Don't be a victim." And so that's a really good, I don't even know if it's still in publication, but it's a really good mantra. Don't be a victim, be a part of it, right? Self-identify that value is created here and show that you are a part of that value stream. Don't be a victim.
Okay, thank you. One final question. So SDI's motto is inspiring service desk to be brilliant. So I want to know what inspires you.
Eveline inspires me every day because of her passion for really digging deep into it. This is a really inspiring space. There's a lot of energy in the DevOps community. It's one of the reasons I had the ability to get involved early on, or at least to observe it. I wouldn't say get involved because I'm not one of the early adopters, but there is a passionate energy here. But I think the focus on continuous learning. Where else do you get to go to work where they say, by the way, today you need to take time to learn, right? As opposed to go do the same thing every single day. We're really lucky in IT, so we have to take advantage of that. So to me, that's very inspirational. I'm not at the early end of my career, right? But if I were in the earlier days of my career and somebody said, look, you're going to go to work and you're going to try to disrupt things, right? Or we want you to be innovative, that's really cool.
I agree. Absolutely. Another ditto. Absolutely. Absolutely. Inspiration for me is learning, researching, finding answers, helping others to get also curiosity, create their curiosity for themselves and be open-minded. That's what inspires me.
All right, fantastic answers. That's about all we have time for today. So thank you so much, ladies, for joining me. And I hope you have a fantastic rest of DOS 19.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.